Hello and welcome to another episode of Beyond Budget Headlines. Last week, we talked about how fiscal considerations might take a backseat in this budget, the future of the Vivad Se Vishwas scheme, and also got a bit of a lesson in the history of India's budget from our very special guest, Mr. Ashok Kumar Bhattacharya. AKB, welcome to the show. Let me start our discussion with what N.K. Singh, the chairman of the 15th Finance Commission, said earlier this week about the fiscal deficit. He said it should be a range instead of a point, and that it might be a more realistic way of looking at things. Can you explain, sir, what this means and what do you think of this whole idea?
Thank you, Ruchika. This has been an issue which has been figuring for the last several weeks, and not just the chairman of the 15th Finance Commission, Mr. N.K. Singh, but there are a few other experts or economists have mooted this idea. When the finance minister presented the budget in February 2020, the revised estimate showed that there is a deviation of exactly 0.5 percentage point of, so therefore the revised estimate showed that the fiscal deficit has gone up to 3.8% of GDP. But as we see now, the actuals have come out, which tell us that the fiscal deficit has actually gone up to 4.6% of GDP. So even before COVID-19 and the economic lockdown played havoc with the Indian economy and the government's finances, the government's fiscal deficit had just gone haywire. Now the debate is that should there be a single target or should there be a range of targets? And the idea of a range has come from the monetary policy regime, where you also have a monetary policy inflation target of 4% with a range of 2% either way, and the higher side and the lower side. But remember, the target is the same. Target is 4%. Similarly, the fiscal deficit target, in my view, should be one target. Yes, you could have a range of 1% here and 1% there, but a target has to be there. Without a target, the markets, the government itself, and anybody who is tracking the government finances will actually will have no way to measure its own performance. So therefore, if you want to have a range, you must not give up the target. There has to be a single target. Yes, you can have a tolerance band, so to say, of 1% above and 1% low, and below or in excess of which you should not unnecessarily worry, but make a statement to Parliament and saying that, listen, I could not meet that target. Broadly speaking, we are actually should be in the same position where we are in the past. That is, if the fiscal deficit is much higher than what it ought to be, then it should stay within a range, and the deviation should be explained to the country, to the people, and to Parliament.
So probably that is the range that needs to be defined, the range of deviation instead of the range of deficit itself, because it will be a more disciplined approach.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
The other thing that I wanted to talk to you about is what former RBI Governor D. Subbarao has told Ms. Sitharaman this about the budget. We also talked about it in our last discussion as to how this is an opportunity. And he has said that let us not waste this crisis. One of the interesting points he has made is that the government may have to choose between encouraging consumption or supporting production. And Mr. Subbarao believes that the government should have a bias towards supporting production. What do you think, sir?
Well, I think the government must spend more and should spend more in a manner that it leads to higher consumption in the short run. There is a belief that if you spend more in infrastructure, it will create immediate demand, which is slightly misplaced, because if you're investing in infrastructure, with a long-term gestation period, the positive impact of such infrastructure investments are not immediately felt. They are felt over a period of time, maybe 2 to 3 years. So it will be important to invest in projects that yield quick returns. And therefore, if it can get quick returns, it is likely that it will boost consumer demand because more money will be flowing into the system, and that money will be in the hands of people who can go out and buy things and services in the market, and that will trigger kind of a consumption demand. And as you know, that almost 60% of the Indian economy is actually composed of private consumption. So it is very important that private consumption needs to be given a boost. What is happening right now is that, yes, the government has announced, the 30 lakh crore of stimulus packages under various schemes. I am not going into that, but what I am saying is that if you look at the economic recovery right now, this economic recovery is happening probably at the cost of long-term consumer demand. Because this recovery, let's take the corporate sector recovery. The corporate sector has seen a profit of 25% in the second quarter, but this profit has largely come on the strength of lower wage cost, and that saving is resulting in corporate profit. Now, if this corporate profit can be funneled back to investments, it will lead to investment demand, and therefore you will see some positive benefit. But if that does not happen, you are going to see tepid consumption demand, and with wages being depressed, a long-term sustainable recovery can be a problem.
Government, I think, will step in. Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman has promised a vibrant budget, and she said that the momentum of public spending has to go on. And she's talked about the infrastructure sector. What are the areas in which you think?
Well, I think she has to spend more on infrastructure, but apart from spending in infrastructure, she also has to make sure that payment cycle, for example, the MSME sector, they are still not getting enough of their payments being released. So you need to provide support, spend your money in a manner that demand in these small enterprises, entrepreneurs, trade, those things are benefited. Of course, you have to spend more on infrastructure. There is a belief that the government has spent a lot of money this year. Actually, the government's, if you take the first 7 months of the budget numbers and the current year, the government actually has not spent more than what it was spending even last year. I mean, the government's annual current year's budget had projected an increase in the expenditure by 13%. But so far, till October end, the expenditure has only been almost same as last year at the same time, which is 0.3% increase. Now, clearly, government is not spending more from its own the government's resources, because it wants to keep the fiscal deficit within the broad manageable limits of whatever that may be, maybe 7 or 8% or whatever. Now, if the government squeezes his own expenditure, the fear is that long-term recovery, sustainable recovery can be a problem. So therefore, the government has to actually go in for more projects, maybe go into small gestation projects, which results in demand recovery at a shorter time intervals.
You're right, sir. Perhaps India has been very cautious in terms of public spending. Fiscal concerns are there, obviously. But what about disinvestment? Every budget promises massive disinvestments, but we don't see much results. And now the stock markets are booming. We are still just starting the whole Air India process or Air India's disinvestment process. How do you see this whole disinvestment situation shaping up? Why is it that we have not been?
Yeah, I think it's an important point. The government, had started the year with with a huge, very ambitious target of 210,000 crore. I mean, 2.1 trillion rupees of disinvestment revenues. Remember that last year, they got only 50,000 crore of disinvestment revenues. So from 50,000 crore of disinvestment revenues, the government was trying to increase it almost by 4 times. Now, this is a tough and ambitious target. It was relying a lot on 2 or 3 big disinvestments or privatization. One was the launching the IPO, initial public offer, for Life Insurance Corporation of India. Now that has got into some problem in terms of valuation of its businesses and all that. It's an insurance company after all. There should not be any unnecessary hurry in it. And in the hurry, if you sell your blue chip insurance company at a price which is lower than what its valuation ought to be, it will not send out a good signal. So LIC which it was supposed to get around almost 90,000 crore rupees, is actually probably off the current year's calendar, financial year calendar. The BPCL was another oil company. Now that disinvestment privatization process is on. One may expect that the BPCL privatization may be completed before the current financial year ends, and that will give maybe 48,000 crore or 50,000 crore of rupees for the government under the disinvestment target. Air India is a difficult one. You do not know how much money the government will get. Probably it will be a distress sell. So the government cannot rely on Air India to meet its disinvestment target of 2.1 trillion rupees. So the meeting the 2.1 trillion disinvestment target will be very, very difficult. Till today, if you look at the government of India's announcements and the figures which have been made public so far, the government has mobilized just about 12,000 crore rupees from disinvestment so far. So 12,000 crore is been mobilized so far, and the target is almost another 2 trillion rupees in the remaining 3.5 months. So it will be a tough job. Now, I think we should be realistic about it. 2.1 trillion target will be difficult to achieve. But if the government can actually lay out a long-term plan of privatizing some of the companies, it can look forward to better revenues under disinvestment maybe next year.
Yes, perhaps long-term view is what we need at this point for a lot of things actually, sir. Thank you so much for joining and sharing all your insights today. We will be back next week.
Thank you, Ruchika.
If you like this video, share it and subscribe to Business Standard. For more news, views and insights, log on to www.business-standard.com. Do also follow us on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Telegram and LinkedIn.